Hi, I felt I probably should wear a CIA disguise so you wouldn't say, oh, him again. Yeah, I'm Alan Leshner, and no. No. Yes. Yeah, tell Alan that. Anyway, I'm Rush Holt. Welcome to a really terrific session that that is in store for us right now, and it is the Gil, Omenn, and Martha Darling Grand Challenges Address. Past AAAS President Gil Omenn and his wife Martha Darling a few years ago endowed a series of lectures that is just something we need in this policy forum, and we have, in fact, used it in this policy forum previously. It's a series to look at the, quote, particularly challenging needs and goals at the intersection of science and society. It is meant to challenge us by thinking about the challenging needs. Gil Omenn, professor of computational medicine and bioinformatics, internal medicine, human genetics, public health, that's all one title, at the University of Michigan, was previously Dean of Public Health, a Howard Hughes medical investigator at the University of Washington, CEO of the University of Michigan Health System, a White House Fellow, Associate Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the Office of Management and Budget, was Chair of COSAPUP and BEST for the National Academy of Sciences, was Chair of the Presidential Congressional Commission on Risk Assessment and Risk Management, and also has been a director on several corporate boards and a number of nonprofits. He currently serves on the Institute of Medicine, isn't it called the Academy of Medicine Council? And so we thank Gil for setting us on this path. And the person who is leading us on this path this year for the Gil Omenn Lecture is Dr. Jane Lubchenco, University Distinguished Professor at Oregon State, a world widely known, I would say renowned, marine ecologist with expertise in oceans, climate change, interactions between the environment and human well-being. You may recall, not just a few years ago, she was Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans, Atmosphere, and the administrator of NOAA. And was also, following that, from 2014 to 2016, the first U.S. envoy to the oceans. I guess it was called Ocean Singular, but at least 7 of the seas. And she is one of the most highly cited ecologists in the world, with 8 classic publications, citation classics. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, the Royal Society, the World Academy of Sciences, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and a past president and chair of AAAS. She is also an elected fellow of AAAS, and it looks to me like you need a rosette.
Thank you, Rich.
So I'll take it right off my lapel if I have to. We want to claim Jane Lubchenco any chance we have, because with her honorary degrees, but more important, with her scholarly excellence and her policy punch, she is just the kind of person that we need to hear from. She has won the Public Welfare Medal from the National Academy of Sciences and the Vannevar Bush National Science Foundation Award. I could go on longer and longer, but let me just say, coming from Colorado College and the University of Washington, PhD in ecology from Harvard, her academic career has been second to none. But more important, she has co-founded organizations to train scientists, Compass. She has led the Aldo Leopold Leadership Program, which has produced real leaders in the ecological and environmental communities. And she has helped create Climate Central, and right now, she, I hope, will tell us about what she's doing to bring the oceans of the world under, let's call it international control. I suppose that's not the way the US administration would phrase it. But the title of Jane Lubchenco's talk is Climate Ocean Action, Connecting the Dots to People. Jane?
Hi, everybody. Did you have a good lunch? Yes. Good, me too. Thank you for being inside on a day like today. It's so gorgeous and beautiful. I can appreciate everybody being tempted to go outside, but I very much appreciate your being here. It is always a treat to be back with my AAAS family. I had really wonderful opportunities to engage with AAAS in many different ways over the years, including helping to design and oversee the building of this building and do the ribbon cutting of that. And so every time I walk into this auditorium, I'm reminded of the official launching of this building, which actually seems like quite a while ago. Rush, thank you so much for that very generous and kind introduction. I appreciate it very much. Gil, it's a treasure always a treasure to see you. I'm sorry that to miss Martha this trip. But I want to thank you personally for all that you have done for science, technology, connecting the dots between STEM fields and not just public health, but people more broadly and policymakers. Gil and I have spent many, many committee hours together over the years, and I really have seen from those experiences and many others all of his generosity of time and spirit and wisdom, as well as resources to not only AAAS, but to society more broadly. So it's a great honor for me to be here and to give the Grand Challenges lecture that Gil and Martha have established. I want to focus our attention today on what I consider to be a major grand challenge. And I want to connect the dots for you between climate and the ocean, but also both of those and people. Because unless we connect all of those dots, we're not going to make the kind of progress that is needed. The bottom line of my remarks is going to be that we can't really think about climate solutions without including the ocean. And that's true on both the mitigation and the adaptation front. Secondly, there is a lot of reason to believe that there is huge potential in connecting the climate-ocean spheres, but we have some key unknowns. And if we could make progress on those, that actually is going to unleash a huge amount of new potential and enable us to be smarter about exactly how we move ahead. The opportunity here is not to only address climate change, pretty big deal in and of itself, but to also simultaneously be able to focus on food security, resilience of coastal communities, and abundance of wildlife. Now that might seem like impossible combination, but bear with me. Gil has reminded me of something that John Gardner said once, which is we are continually faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insurmountable problems. And I think that that's actually pretty true when we talk about climate change today. It is a great opportunity, but it seems like an insoluble problem sometimes. It is just so challenging. So many people think of climate change as insoluble. I don't. I think that there are many things that, I do not think it's hopeless. There's a lot that we can do. A lot is actually underway. It's just not at the pace or the scale yet that is needed. So the question is, how do we get there? By the same token, there is so much bad news coming out about the ocean. There's abundant evidence from the salty, wet world that it is warmer, the oceans are more acidic, they hold less oxygen, they're stormier, sea level is rising, so the oceans are higher, the oceans are depleted because we've massively overfished much of them, they're disrupted because we're interrupting the interactions of the plants and animals and microbes in those ecosystems. And because of that disruption, they're less predictable. And then we have this massive pollution from not only plastics, but nutrients and toxins. And you roll that all up together, and people are saying, oh my gosh, it's hopeless. There's just nothing we can do. It is too big to fix. There are so many problems, and it is so difficult to make headway with each of them, much less all of them. And so it just seems impossibly complex. And even though John Gardner uses the words insoluble problem, I think a lot of people today would call these wicked problems. And certainly the ocean and climate change are wicked problems. Not only do we have current problems, but we need even more of the ocean. We need more from the ocean because we need to feed more mouths. We need to do a lot more of pretty much everything that we do in the ocean, we need more of. So these two challenges are parallel in many people's minds, although most of the attention is given to climate change. But the problems in the oceans are actually really important and more important than most people understand for their own health, prosperity, and well-being. So these ocean changes that I mentioned, just very briefly, threaten the future of the most vulnerable people on the planet. There are billions of people who depend directly on seafood for their primary source of protein. They are vulnerable, they are at risk, and climate change is making that much, much more difficult. These problems threaten the economic prosperity, the quality of life, and opportunities for everybody. And they threaten the well-being of the rich, rich abundance of life in the ocean. We think about the oceans as being this wellspring of life, but it also has the most amazing biodiversity and life forms that we just are only beginning to understand. So for all of these reasons, those changes that are underway for the ocean now, because of the suite of human activities that are underway, mean big problems. The oceans have long been important to people in ways that are obvious and ways that are less obvious. They've been our grocery stores, our highways, our pharmacies, our playgrounds, our churches, our schools, our libraries, and indeed an insurance policy. They really provide the life support systems for the planet. 1 in 7 people rely on fish for their daily protein. And as we think about food security for the future, it's not just in grain and livestock. Much of it is going to be in the ocean with both wild capture fisheries and aquaculture. The ocean does things that we don't often think about, but that are critically important. It provides over half of the oxygen on the planet. It absorbs over 90% of the excess heat that is trapped by greenhouse gas emissions. and it absorbs nearly half of the CO2 that we emit. So it is a major player in the climate system. We've known that for a long time. We know that the heat that it absorbs and the CO2 that it absorbs are keeping things less bad on land than they might be otherwise. But we don't really think about connecting the solutions across this climate and the ocean worlds. In addition to those very practical things, the ocean does something that's magical for us. People are inspired by life in the oceans. They go to the seashore to recreate, to be with families, to reconnect, to deconnect. And the best quote that I've seen that encapsulates this is this quote from one of Pablo Neruda's poems, which says, "I need the sea because it teaches me." And obviously that teaching me can be interpreted in many, many different ways. So the ocean is important to us for many reasons. We have this ocean problem and the climate problem. But what if we thought about these problems as being more connected than we usually do? Most people who are focusing intensely on addressing climate change are focused on activities on land. Critically important, but I would assert not the whole story. What if there were great opportunities in solving them together? This, I think, presents a prime opportunity for one of the grand challenges that Gil invited us to think about and tackle. People have started thinking along these lines. The Global Climate Action Summit that was last September in San Francisco, co-hosted by Governor Jerry Brown and former Mayor Michael Bloomberg, really started to shine the spotlight on the climate-ocean nexus. And this climate-ocean action language started to gain some currency. The next Conference of the Parties, the COP for climate change, is going to be hosted by the country of Chile. And they have announced publicly that they're going to have the first blue COP, meaning they're going to include more about the ocean in the discussions about climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So we have an increased interest on the part of policymakers and businesses and others in connecting the dots, but we don't have all the information that they would like to know. The ocean has a key role to play in both mitigation and adaptation, but these unknowns are worth pursuing. We need to know how much, how fast, how big, is it scalable? How do we create the synergies between solutions for climate and solutions for the problems in the ocean? What are those opportunities? And I'm suggesting to you that's a rich, rich opportunity, not only for the research community, but for the policy community and for citizens more broadly. And so connecting the dots is not just between climate and ocean, but it's to all of the actors and stakeholders that have a key role to play. Part of this mitigation and adaptation potential is in these three buckets, and I'll give you a few examples. We can increase carbon sequestration through coastal habitats and open ocean, and I'll say a little bit about those. There's an opportunity to decrease carbon emissions through shipping and fishing in doing it differently. And we could get a lot of bang for the buck if we would replace gray infrastructure along the coastal areas with green infrastructure. So let me dig into those a little bit more deeply. Coastal ecosystems sequester carbon in ways that are incredibly impressive. There is so much more potential per unit area for carbon sequestration by mangroves, by tidal marshes and seagrass meadows than tropical forests, boreal forests, and temperate forests per unit area. So this is worth looking at. And you may know that these coastal ecosystems are at much greater risk. They are disappearing much faster than any of the other terrestrial landscapes. And so here is an opportunity to slow the rate of loss of these important ecosystems and restore them so they can be providing this amazing carbon sequestration. Mangrove forests do a lot of other things for us. They filter pollutants and sediment from the water, and so the water that's passing through them and then going on downstream is cleaner. They provide nursery habitat for many, many, many economically important fisheries. They protect coastal areas from storm surge and flooding. So they have lots of other co-benefits above and beyond sequestering carbon. Those habitats are disappearing at a phenomenal rate. And you can see where these habitats are globally, and they are under threat pretty much every place. Between 2000 and 2015, because of mangrove deforestation, to do things like create new places for people to live, to create shrimp ponds, for example, is a common reason for getting rid of mangrove forests. We released 122 million tons of carbon in that period of time, and that's roughly equivalent to the annual emissions of Brazil. So this is beginning to give you a sense of the scale of importance of some of these things. Mangrove tree cover loss by year is shown here with a number of continents. So you can just get a sense of the magnitude and the geographic opportunities that exist here. It's not just happening in the coastal areas, though. The open ocean plays a key role in the carbon system. There are many, many ways in which it does that, but by capturing, by phytoplankton pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere and out of the water to make themselves, essentially, those are eaten by bigger things. Those bigger things end up, for example, when whales die and fall to the bottom. This number 7 over here that's called deadfall carbon. Anything that falls to the bottom then is sequestered for a long, long time. So this schematic just sort of illustrates some of the different ways in which the animals in the ocean, large and small, play a key role in the carbon cycle. And some of that is utilized in the upper portions of the ocean and isn't sequestered. Some of it ends up in the deep sea and is sequestered. And having better numbers on all of those will give us a sense of some of the potential. Now, you all are well familiar with the fact that we used to have lots more whales in the ocean before we started whaling. And folks have calculated that just the large baleen whales store now 9.1 times 10 to the 6th tons less carbon than they did before whaling. So they were a key part of the carbon system that we no longer have, but that is now regrowing. So things that we could do to prevent entanglement of whales in fishing gear, for example, that is a current threat, or things we can do to lessen noise that is a problem for whales, would enhance rates of growth of the populations of whales and actually have a direct benefit to carbon. So these are the kinds of examples that are out there for which we need better data so that we really understand which one of these things has more potential. So that's how do we sequester more carbon. The second piece of this was how do we reduce emissions in ongoing activities. And I want to focus on 2 activities, shipping and fishing. Shipping is the way most of our goods are transported from continent to continent these days. And that shipping is supposed to become even more important. There are ways that we can make shipping greener, if you will, and that is a huge technological challenge and an opportunity. Fisheries are critically important for food security. They provide jobs. And fishing in general is not done in a way that is generally very efficient in many different regards. But relative to just carbon dioxide, the fishing fleets are pretty polluting, if you will. And there is a lot of opportunity to have those activities be less polluting. Catches globally are on the decrease, catches of fish. Emissions are rising, and we can do something about both of those. Some of those adaptations could be making the use of fuels a lot more efficient, focusing on the kinds of fisheries that are lower in emissions, and critically important, rebuilding fish stocks so that there are actually more fish in the ocean. They play an important role in the carbon cycle. They can also be available to be fished, and we can do so in ways that are fishing smarter, not harder. In the United States, we've seen some amazing progress in reforming our fisheries in US federal waters. We have seen that it is possible to end overfishing, to recover fisheries, and to have many more fish in the ocean, as well as more seafood on people's plates, and have more profit for the fishing industry. And I want to give you some data on this because I think it's a really nice example of what can be done when you can get the right incentives underway and have the right things happen. So I'm going to compare 2 years for you, the year 2000 and the year 2018. The number of overfished stocks in US federal waters in the year 2000 was 92. That's pretty bad, but that had been slashed to 41 by 2018 because of the new management incentives and requirements that are in place now. More importantly, the number of rebuilt stocks that had been so depleted, they were closed to fishing, the fish have come back, and now they can be fished again sustainably because the fish abundances are so much greater. So we had 0 of those in the year 2000 and 45 in 2018. And that has happened in the since 2008, with an increase in catch of 24%, and an increase in value, 24% increase in value, 21% increase in catch. So it is possible to reform fisheries and to recover the fisheries that are there. There's huge upside in doing that smart fishery reform. If we could reform all the fisheries in the world, not easy, but not impossible, we could increase seafood yields by 40%, the abundance of fish by 5%, the enhanced revenues by 30%. So relative to business as usual, there is a huge upside to fishing smarter, not harder. And that means more food for food security. It means more fish in the ocean to play key roles in ocean ecosystems and to be part of the carbon cycle. And finally, there's a lot of armoring of our shores, using of hard structures to prevent coastal erosion, getting rid of the natural vegetation like wetlands and vegetated coastal dunes. And that is not helping, essentially. Green infrastructure means restoring, protecting, and enhancing those natural ecosystems on coastal margins instead of using seawalls, revetment, breakwaters, and levees. Globally, we spend nearly 30 times more on rebuilding gray infrastructure than we do on coastal green infrastructure and conservation. And if we could make a dent in that, we could actually not only have those coastal wetlands that are sequestering carbon, providing nurseries for a lot of important fisheries, providing habitat for wildlife, places for recreation, and stabilizing coastal areas. So there's huge opportunity here in each one of those bins that I've suggested. I've provided a few examples of things that we know for which we have some information. There's a lot of information that we don't have that if we did, we could actually be incorporating this into our policy and management decisions. Within the ocean, if we think about having our fisheries be climate ready, our ocean ecosystems be climate ready, managing not for today, but for the climate changes that are already underway, having smarter development in coastal areas, maintaining that all-important sequestration potential for ecosystems, and protecting coastal areas. More green, less gray infrastructure are all parts of this. Now, we already have an abundance of tools, such as marine protected areas, but other tools as well, that we know can work. They're not at the scale that we need. We know that if you have no extractive activity, which is what a fully protected area is, you can protect habitats and biodiversity in a very dramatic way. You can restore the ecological balance. You can enhance the resilience of that system to environmental and climate change. You can also store carbon and replenish fisheries. So marine protected areas are a very powerful but underutilized tool that could have multiple benefits. Store carbon, replenish fisheries, protect wildlife. Win, win, win. Lots and lots of opportunities here. So this is about connecting the dots. This is a call to arms, if you will, for us to connect the dots. And this means connecting the dots not only between climate and the ocean, but between this science and the entities that are in positions to make change possible. And that's governments have a key role, businesses have a key role, citizens have a key role. And they all need to have better information about the importance of the ocean and the feasibility of some of these ocean-centric actions that could help with both mitigation and adaptation. Fortunately, they are ready. They are asking for information. I've been advising a group of the 10 largest seafood companies in the world, shown on this slide, that have band together under the name of CBOS, which stands for Seafood Businesses for Ocean Stewardship. And they have become convinced, these CEOs, these 10 CEOs, personally convinced that climate change is a major threat to their future, and they need to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. That was sort of the entry point, and now they are opening up and wanting to know more from scientists about what else can we do, not only to address climate change, but to make the ocean healthier, to return the ocean to a healthy state. 78% of countries in the world are coastal nations. That's a lot of potential interest on the part of governments. I'm also assisting with something that's called the High-Level Panel to Build a Sustainable Ocean Economy. This is a group of 14 heads of state of the countries that you see listed here, chaired by Norway and Palau, who have committed to making changes in their own policies and practices in their countries, convening their neighbors to do things at the regional scale, and taking new actions to the United Nations. They've been talking to scientists, they've been talking to businesses, they've been saying, how can we work together to build a sustainable ocean economy? And this is focused squarely on climate change because it's so critical to a sustainable ocean economy. So we're seeing an appetite there on the part of the private sector, on the part of businesses, and we need to respond to that. So my suggestion to you is that the ocean is a central part of the climate solution. That's not usually what most people who are working on climate would go to. You hear any of the scientists, most policymakers that talk about climate change, and they're focusing on all of the key actions that are needed on land. Those are incredibly important. They're essential for the future. But alone will probably not be enough. And if we can begin to think more broadly, there are huge synergies. We don't have to do all of the carbon capture and sequestration and conservation on land. The ocean provides a huge opportunity for doing even more and getting to scale a lot faster. The research on key unknowns is going to help unleash that potential. So I'm suggesting to you a huge opportunity here that needs to be pursued. And that opportunity is not only to address the climate change, it's to also make some significant headway with food for the future, with resilience of coastal communities to coastal storms, to storm surge, abundance of wildlife, so that we can continue to benefit from the wealth of things that the ocean provides to us. So I would suggest to you that it is time for all of us to, pardon the pun, seize the day and embrace the potential for co-benefits of tackling climate change and ocean health together. This is a grand challenge. It's a grand challenge for science, technology, engineering, and math. It's a grand challenge for policymakers, for businesses. It's a grand challenge for society more broadly. And it has potentially transformative benefits for people and for wildlife. Thank you very much.
Dr. Lubchenco will be pleased to take some questions. Let me lead off with two different questions. One, I think, a quick answer. In the studies, the research, and in the administrative and regulatory changes, what would be the most dramatic change that you might see in a couple of years that would be something we could hold out to the world leaders and to the public, showing that change is possible?
So that's exactly the kind of question that a policymaker would gravitate toward. Gee. And one for which we don't have the answer yet. And that's exactly why I think this is worth pursuing. We have good reason to believe it's big and it's important. We don't know quite what the magnitude is or which one of the options is going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. So that's why we need to get on this.
Give us some ideas in research or in, is it marine protected areas?
So,
is getting a couple of those, or is it?
One of the challenges is coming up with the numbers that are credible where you can compare across these, okay? The other is looking at if we wanted, so there is, you mentioned marine protected areas. That's, I think, a prime example. Currently, 4% of the ocean, 4% of the ocean is in implemented, fully protected areas. That is tiny. The countries of the world have committed to protecting 10% by 2020 under both the Convention on Biological Diversity Aichi goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, 10% by 2020. They're now looking at what should we have our targets be for 2030. And so the question is, not only, and that was driven by a focus on the importance of protected areas for wildlife. If we start adding carbon sequestration potential to that, and if there is the potential for countries, for example, to include protected areas in their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, or to incorporate marine protected areas into the REDD++, which is the International Accounting Scheme for Carbon, that opens up all sorts of new possibilities. So nobody's done those calculations yet. They need to be done. And there is the potential there for not only protecting wildlife, but carbon, and also because if you protect areas, things get big and crowded inside the protected area, fish swim outside, and so there's a food provisioning benefit to the adjacent areas outside. I'm working with a group that is putting together at very high resolution, so 50 by 50 kilometers for the ocean, the maps of the prime hotspots for biodiversity, the prime hotspots for carbon sequestration, for carbon, and the prime hotspots for food provisioning. So we have a map of each of those, and then we want to overlay them. So that's the kind of thing that is underway, but we can't give you the answer yet. And that's why I'm saying this is a grand challenge.
So, yeah, I'll hold my second question. Let's go to Gil and Kevin and all.
Gil?
Well, let me just say, it was a fresh topic and a wonderful presentation.
Thank you,
Thank
Gil.
you so much.
Thank you.
I was perseverating on the example of the mangroves. Can you give us a little education about how they can sequester so much carbon?
Yes. So mangroves are right at so mangroves live in soft sediment areas, not on rocky shores, soft sediment areas in tropical areas. And their roots trap a lot of sediment. And so there's a lot of carbon that is sequestered in that sediment. And that sediment is both coming down rivers, because they're at the mouths of rivers. That sediment is coming down rivers, and the carbon is trapped deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you go walking around in mangroves, it's often kind of stinky and sulfury because a lot of that's anoxic. And those habitats are also they grow very rapidly. And so there is both active carbon, CO2 taken out of the atmosphere, but there's also a lot of carbon that is stored in them. So it's the rate of growth and the fact that they are storing more and more, and it's not getting loose, if you will. It's just captured there. Mangroves are at an incredible, they're vulnerable because they have not been seen as being important. They're just stinky, icky, mosquito-laden places that who wants to go there, so let's get rid of it. But they're so incredibly important, not only for carbon, but as nursery areas and wildlife habitats. So they are much more important than we've been giving them credit for. They also protect downstream coral reefs. So if you remove mangroves, then all that sediment that's coming down rivers goes right over the coral reefs, smothers it, kills it. And so there are interactions among these coastal ecosystems. And finally, as if that wasn't enough, we know from very sad and painful experiences that where mangroves have been removed, for example, in Aceh province in Indonesia, when there are tsunamis or when there is a lot of storm surge from hurricanes, typhoons, or other things, mangroves, as well as coral reefs and kelp forests, all those coastal habitats dampen the storm surge and absorb that energy and protect the things that are just upstream of that, including people's homes and agricultural areas. And so they play lots of different key roles, and we haven't cared about them. We've just gotten rid of them. And by protecting them, we could actually get multiple benefits, some of which I've mentioned.
That's great.
Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Finneran with Issues in Science and Technology. I have a pessimistic, optimistic question. The pessimistic question is you identified a number of negative trends in ocean health, and all of which are slow-moving train wrecks that we're watching. I wonder, among those, which are the ones that have the most potential to be threshold effects where things are no longer slow motion, but all of a sudden create crisis situations for us? So what do you worry about? And the other is, this ocean management is one of several global issues where we're trying to develop governance structures to deal with them. You know, with artificial intelligence, with human genetic engineering, with potential for climate engineering. So I wonder where you look for examples where we've made progress. Where are the models, maybe in oceans themselves, but also in some other areas, that you see suggest the paths that we might follow that'll make us effective in managing ocean health?
Great questions, Kevin. Thank you. We don't really know where all the tipping points are with a lot of these systems, and that's one of the challenges. One of the things that we do know that we can turn fisheries around for the most part. Not every single fishery that has been depleted can be recovered. We've seen that with cod in the North Atlantic. But many of the other fisheries are coming back with good management and or with strong protected areas. So we can see there is a positive opportunity there to recover fisheries if we get fishery management right. So that's an opportunity. Where there are tipping points, like with cod, we don't know where, exactly where those are. We just know that there are some examples. One of the other things that people worry a lot about are the impacts of ocean acidification. So the ocean's been doing this great job of taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but the consequence is it makes the oceans more acidic, and that has a negative consequence for much of life in the ocean, especially things that make their hard parts, shells or skeletons, out of calcium carbonate. Makes it harder for them to make their shells, and they erode more quickly. One of the big unknowns are the interactions among these. So some species might be able to cope with warmer waters, but not warmer waters plus more acidic ocean. So it's those kinds of challenges that we are trying to wrap our heads around. Relative to good news and progress, where are we seeing encouraging signs? I would point to marine protected areas as one example. For most of, so context, for most of the time that people have been on the Earth, the ocean has been a de facto, fully protected marine area because we couldn't get there for long enough to really get at most of what was there. That's changed very, very rapidly in the last half century, where we can now fish, mine, drill every place. And so in creating protected areas, we are sort of rebalancing the system, if you will. We want an ocean where we can use parts of it sustainably without using them up, and we need to protect other parts where we're not using them. That idea of protecting them has been around for a long time, but for most of the last few decades, the percentage of the ocean that's protected, so a decade ago, it was less than 1% of the ocean was protected. So in just a decade, we've gone from 1 to 4% protected, which is a pretty dramatic rise. And as I mentioned, the countries have committed to 10%. People now are saying what we really need is about 30% of the ocean by 2030 in fully protected or highly protected areas. So that's an area where we have abundant science. We know what we can get, what the bang for the buck is for protecting areas. We just have to get on with doing it, and there is increasing momentum for that to happen. Another good news where there's a lot of momentum is in fisheries reform. We've seen, I showed you the examples of what we've done in the US. Other countries are beginning to follow suit, and there's been much more attention to addressing illegal fishing, which has been a very serious problem. And the combination of AI, machine learning, satellite imaging, and new legal treaties and international agreements is combining to begin to make a significant dent on illegal fishing. So there's a lot of good stuff that's underway. It's just not at the scale that's needed. And so the question with just in the ocean is, how do we accelerate that progress? And I'm saying one way to accelerate that progress is to quit thinking about the ocean over here and the climate system over here and look for the synergies where we can address things that will actually achieve some win-win solutions. Yes?
Hi, Dr. Lubchenco. I'm Tim Stryker with USGS. You may have partially answered this question in some of your previous remarks, but could you speak to the the threat to coral reefs and the bleaching of coral reefs and what might be done to protect them and reverse the damage that's been done to them in the future?
Yeah, thank you very much. Are you a scientist at USGS?
No, I'm a policy person.
Policy person? So a shout out to all of the federal workers, be they scientists or non-scientists. We need what each of you does each and every day. So thank you for your service, and keep up what we need you to do. Coral reefs are bleaching, and that's one of the really bad news stories that's out there. Everybody knows the really horrible things that have been happening on the Great Barrier Reef because of the amount of warming that's happening, and because the warming is happening more frequently than it used to. And so we are seeing significant damage to those coral reef systems that are incredibly diverse and very important. What's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is a strong warning sign that we need to be paying attention to. Those reefs are also threatened by other things that are underway. And one interesting thing to at least think about is the contrast between what's happening in Australia and the Great Barrier Reef and what's happening also in the Indo-Pacific, in this case with a national park that is in the Philippines called Tubataha National Park, which is in the middle of the Sulu Sea. It has been a fully protected marine protected area since the mid-'80s. It is remote, so not close to any runoff from land. It doesn't have, people can go there and dive, but there's no extractive activity that's underway. And that park has been exposed to the same warming that we're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef, but has not had the same bleaching. And some of the hypotheses are that because those reefs are so much healthier to begin with, because they don't have the overfishing, they don't have the runoff from land, that they are better able to cope, if you will, with the warmer water. We don't know if that's in fact the case, but there is variation from one place to another, and it may be yet another argument for having more pristine systems and protecting them while we try to rein in emissions. But it is a very real challenge. Maureen is standing up. Russ is giving us the high sign here.
Session starting 3 minutes.
Okay,
So.
I'll be quick. I've been too long. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Luchenko. My name is Amanda Carter. I'm a Sea Grant Canals Fellow at NOAA. And actually, I just have to give a little shout out. That is what I studied for my PhD, so if you're interested in talking about that, I'm happy to. I had a quick question for you. I think that a lot of us understand and know some of the different things we can do with mitigation techniques in the ocean, improving fisheries and everything else. And I know that a lot of that has improved in the United States, but an issue with that is still more internationally, where people can't afford to improve their fishing gear or their fishing vessels, where it's sort of a matter of putting food on the plate for their family. What are some of the different things that you think we can take to incentivize some of that being improved in other areas, or perhaps to facilitate that process and kind of move that along, since even if we improved all of our practices, it wouldn't be enough to make the difference that we need?
Yep. So thanks to you and all the other Canal Sea Grant Fellows. We really appreciate what you do. The key word in what you asked was incentivize. And people are beginning to understand how important it is to provide the incentives for different behavior. And those incentives can be economic incentives, but they can also be social incentives, whether it's behavioral norms, social norms, any one of those. And we are seeing a significant transition to more sustainable fisheries at a small scale in many developing countries, with paying attention to changing the incentives for fishermen and the incentives for countries, if you stop fishing in a destructive way, to give the stocks time to rebuild, you have to have a transition, an economic transition plan to enable those fishers and those fishing communities to get past this valley of death before the stocks can rebuild. And there are a number of schemes underway where that is happening, and they are being very successful. Again, they're not at the scale that we need them to be, but there is hope that it is possible, and it's focusing on the incentives. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate this opportunity and your great questions. Thank you.
So, yes, please, let's thank Jane, not only for a beautiful, challenging talk, but also for everything else she has been doing in environmental policy. Thank you. Oh, okay, yes.